memory. And finally, we're here in June, and our topic is our fourth C. Last but not least, today is the final installment of Foresee the Future. We will talk about creativity. And I just want to say a few words about the UCI Brain initiative before we get started. Many of you know this, but some of you, this may be a little bit new to you. But these initiatives are academic initiatives that are funded by the provost, and they are intended to last for 3 years. So our initiative began in 2018 and is now coming to its conclusion at the end of this month. So it will now transition to no longer be called the UCI Brain Initiative and just be called UCI Brain. And for many of you who are familiar with that terminology, you probably know we've been using that term for some time now. But it will transition to actually become a signature program that will be run by the Center for the Neurobiology of Learning and Memory, which I'm also very fortunate to be the director of. So we will sort of adopt the initiative under the center, and we will continue to run and manage it, hopefully in perpetuity. And what I can promise is that it will bring back excellent programming, as you have been accustomed to, certainly continue to support collaborative research and training efforts, and support our community partnerships. We will have some big announcements coming this fall related to the initiative, so stay tuned and check back with us then. We'll have lots of exciting things going on in the fall, especially as we transition to more live interactions and be able to host you all again on campus. Okay, now I will hand it off to our moderator and host for the evening, my colleague, Dr. Amal Alashkar, who is the brain behind this entire Foresee operation. So Foresee the Future was really her foresight and her vision, and this is a series that she really conceived of from the very beginning, and we are delighted that she's here to host and moderate the last installment of this series with us. So with that, please welcome my colleague, Dr. Alashkar.
Thank you very much, Mike, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in our fourth and last, but not least, panel of our UCI Brain Dialogue series. Creativity. What a wonderful topic to end our series with. Einstein, Newton, Picasso, Ramanujan, Da Vinci, Darwin, Beethoven, Charlie Chaplin, and Steve Jobs. These are only few examples of a long list of individuals who have existed in different times of human history, who contributed to different art and science fields, yet they have one thing in common. They are creative. What made these individuals creative? Why are some people so much more creative than others? What's the science behind creativity? What does it take to be creative? Are creative people born or made? Are there prerequisites for creativity, such as personalities or psychological traits, or specific types of thinking that lead to creative ideas? Is intelligence prerequisite for creativity? Are there places in the brain where creativity is created? Are the brains of creative people wired differently? Can we modify or manipulate brain circuits to augment our creativity? Aristotle said, no great mind has ever existed without a touch of madness. Is there a link between creativity and mental illnesses? Do cultures or education systems play roles in nurturing or suppressing creativity? These and other questions we are thrilled to hear thoughts about from our speakers, and luckily we have impressive and creative panelists with us today to sort out these questions and maybe to give us some tips to boost our creativity. So let me introduce our speakers. So we have in alphabetical order, Dr. Linda Palmer. Dr. Linda is a neuroscientist at School of Medicine in the University of California, Irvine, with an interdisciplinary background in computer science and philosophy. Her research is focused on rodent studies of learning and memory and their expression in the brain. She's investigating exploration and discovery, and she's searching for brain networks underlying the aha or eureka moment. We have Dr. Bryan Reynolds. Bryan is a Chancellor's Provost and Claire Trevor Provost, a professor in the School of Arts at UCI. He is author of many books and plays. His academic work spans several disciplines, including critical theory, history, performance studies, philosophy, and cognitive science. His work focuses on the experience and performance of consciousness, subjectivity, affect, and socio-cultural differences. He is co-founder of the Amsterdam-based Transversal Theatre Company. He has directed plays, and his own plays have been produced in over 10 countries across the United States, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Dr. Emma Wray self-describes as performance architect. Her work is grounded through her dance practice, but expands out into other fields such as wellness and artificial intelligence. She is the creator of Embodiology, an Africana movement practice that optimizes thinking and well-being. She's an associate professor of dance at the University of California, Irvine. As always, our event is divided into 3 parts. In the first part, I would like to invite our panelists to talk about their work and research as they relate to creativity. And in the second part, we will kick off the conversation, asking questions so our speakers dive in depth into these discussions. And in the third part, we will open the floor to give our audience an opportunity to ask questions to our panelists. So please put your questions on the chat and Mike will monitor the chat. So let's start with our panelists. Linda, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right then. So I'm a philosopher and a neuroscientist, and I'm going to be talking about the work of this gentleman here. This is Emmanuel Kant, an 18th century German philosopher. This drawing is by the very talented Cheryl Cotman. And in the corner here, what you see is some data from a study in which a rat was exploring a novel environment. And you see 4 different exploratory forays that he has made into that. So what do these have to do with one another? Well, what is creativity? What I want to do today is kind of give a framework of how to understand this question based in Kant's theory of aesthetic judgment, his theory of beauty, and then turn to a neuroscience hypothesis. So Kant had 3 great critiques. His third critique was the critique of judgment. And in this work, he talked about aesthetic judgment, judgments of beauty, scientific discovery, and ordinary empirical cognition. And I want to start with this last. So you look out the window, you see a squirrel, right? What's going on there? This is, for Kant, his account describes the construction of experience. And he was ahead of his time. For example, David Hume argued that all your mental representations were simply less vivid copies of your sensory impressions. Kant's account is probably closer to the mark. And one of the
Can't
first,
even imagine.
Can you hear me? Oh, so I heard someone speaking. Okay, I will continue. Yeah, one of the first things that one of the key things that he said was that all of the sensory material that you're working with initially comes in as successive. And you have to do this mental work in order to turn it into either, say, in this case, a perception of an enduring object, say a house, if you're walking around it, or into the parts of an episode, right? So this mental work, he divides it up into 2 abilities or functions of the mind. He calls them imagination and understanding. And Kant took pride in what he called his discovery that imagination is a part of all perception. So, for example, you might, in the lay meaning of imagination, you might think of a pink unicorn with blue wings. But Kant says, in Kant's account, imagination is already at play when you look out and you see the squirrel. So what's going on here? Well, he says that imagination is the function that takes the sensory data and arranges it in space and in time. And then understanding takes this construction and subsumes it under general concepts. Oh, that's a squirrel. Oh, that's a cup of coffee. Normally, you're not aware of this mental processing. You just see the result. You're just aware of the result, but we can kind of call attention to it. If you look at this bust of Nefertiti, what's next to it is a tracing of someone's eye as they were looking at this bust, and those are saccades. The eye is constantly in motion, so you have to take all this incoming sensory material and turn it into an enduring percept. Or we can look at some ambiguous figures, for example, the duck rabbit in the upper right. If you have seen that, this is Wittgenstein's example. But if you haven't seen it before, I could bias your interpretation of it by talking first about carrots, or if I talked first about pawns, you'd be likely to see it in one way or another. And this illustrates one of the points about imagination and understanding is that this is not an assembly line process. The imagination and understanding have to coordinate, they have to work together in order to make sense of the world. So now I want to turn to the account of beauty. You're looking at this painting, let's say you're enjoying it. What's going on mentally here? Well, Kant claims that aesthetic judgment reveals a property of our cognitive powers, which without this analysis would have remained unknown. All right, so what is this new property? I'm going to take another example here. This is a Matisse painting. And so what Kant suggests is happening here, let's say you're looking at this painting and you're really enjoying it. What's going on in your mind? His claim is that what's happening is that your imagination and understanding are playing with the possibilities of organizing this material. And you might, and in this play, it doesn't have to make cognitive sense. So you might, for example, notice consciously or not, the shape of the hairdo of the woman in the foreground is echoed in the trees outside the window. That's not a cognitive connection, but it's aesthetically pleasing. There's the repetition of yellow forms of different sizes, some with boundaries, some without. The wallpaper pattern appears to be sort of echoed in the tablecloth. So this is a very pleasurable experience. And Kant's claim is that what's happening here is that this is actually a pleasure in the play of your cognitive powers. So you have this internal feeling of your own mental activity. And so back to the three kinds of judgment. So as a metaphor here, consider an n-dimensional space of the possibilities of combining the manifold. In aesthetic experience, the imagination and understanding play freely in the space of possible organizations. In science, instead, they search through this space. They're blazing new trails. They're looking for new concepts, natural laws, ways of organizing this, but using in ways that do or could make cognitive sense. Not yet known, but the goal is to firm up some determinate understanding. And then finally, in ordinary judgment, they follow well-worn paths through the space. You look out the window, you see the squirrel. And according to Kant, the common inner sense, as he calls it, this internal signal of pleasure, is required for all three. Now, you might think, well, yeah, in judgment of beauty, that I could see that story, or in science, there's this aha moment. It's very pleasurable when you figure out how to understand your data. But what's going on in ordinary judgment? And what Kant says is that, yeah, the pleasure doesn't rise to awareness in this case because it's become habitual, you're sort of used to it, but he says it must have been there at one time. Now, he doesn't explain that. What does he mean by this? I think we can understand that if we think about children. When they are learning to understand and comprehend the world, they're acquiring these concepts. They seem to really enjoy it. There seems to be a pleasure going on there. I think that's one way to understand this. Or even in sort of history and culture, all these concepts that we use must have been invented at one time. All right, so let's turn to neuroscience. Is there such an internal signal when the mind or the brain organizes and makes sense? And I want to say here that Kant himself was not interested in the brain. He was interested in the mind, and he wasn't interested in how it was implemented. But we might be interested in how it's implemented. And just to give a very general sketch here, this is a drawing here of a rat brain. It's not very big, but it has things in common with, it has all the same parts, but it just in different proportions as your brain. And in general, what happens is that the sensory materials arrive at posterior cortical areas. They kind of cascade up through primary and secondary sensory areas into association areas where like visual and auditory inputs might be unified. And finally, in frontal areas where we have the most general schema and rules. That's the general idea here. And so this is the coordinating activity that happens in neocortex. And what I am asking is there a signal or a sense that would be in a position to report on when this coordination has happened? And we want to look now at these two subcortical structures, hippocampus and amygdala. I'm just going to say briefly that there's some evidence that time and space are represented in hippocampus. I'm not going to really have time to go into this, but I want to talk about this work that was done by my colleague. So if there's anything that could count as an aha experience for a rodent, it might be this. So this is a very standard rodent learning task. So you give the rat or a mouse 2 odors, and only one of those is rewarded. But you can't tell them that. So you have to just give them this repeated trials of this until they figure it out. And then once they figured out, oh, the job here is to pick the right odor, then you can take them and you can go and run your learning study. And that's what most people do. What this study looked at was that moment when they first figured out the task. And what was found here was this, in the center panels here in amygdala and hippocampus, was a specific pattern of activity that you saw only when they first got the task, but not when the same animal was performing when the animal was performing this same behavior later as a well-trained animal. Now that was a rewarded task. I'm interested in, is there an internal signal? Does the signal happen without external reward? So I've been developing this unsupervised learning paradigm in which the animal explores the environment, but there's no rewards there. He goes out, and it's perfectly voluntary on the part of the animal. He goes out, and you can see on this trajectory of about 30 minutes of travel through this. Several of those forays are outlined. And what we found was that there were encoding sites in hippocampal output stages indicating associated with this learning. And then my question here is the neuronal activity during encoding. Do we see this aha signal? And we have some pilot evidence that the hippocampal signal is there. We're looking for the basolateral amygdala signal, and then some others. We'll look into other regions as well. So that's where we're at. Now I just want to summarize the key points here, or this coordination between generalizing and particularizing mental functions. And there's an internal signal of this coordination. And I want to mention about ordinary habitual cognition. This is an efficient, shorthand, finite way of representing this sort of infinite experience that we have to work with in order to comprehend the world and communicate using words. But these concepts are blind to what doesn't fit or is unexpected, and we have to keep in mind, does my concept actually account for what's in front of me? The implications here is that creativity is a fundamental basis of all human cognition, and there's an importance here of goal-less, unconstrained exploration and play. And that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Linda, for this wonderful presentation. Thank you. So we will move now to Brian. Brian, you can share your screen.
Okay, let me say first of all, thanks so much for having me here. It's really an honor. Thank you, Amal and Michael and Diana. And it's great to be in such distinguished company. I want to just share with you a little bit of some ideas, and then I'll show you kind of an example of them, but I'll explain it, and then we talk about it later. But I want to think about a lot of my work has to do with affect, which is really like sort of comprehensive experience of everything, whatever you're experiencing, whether it's be with regard to subjectivity or consciousness, or it's visceral. It's kind of the whole thing. And I've tried to develop both in my theater work, but also in my critical theory, kind of interrelationship between those two things, where I'm really sort of doing a praxis and trying to help, use the theory to understand the affect that one can create, with the theater work, and the other way around. So when I think typically about how we move through the world, we try to make the unfamiliar familiar. Let's say you're walking down the street at night and somebody's coming the other way, and you try to assess maybe initially whether or not they're a threat by how they're walking or moving, what they're wearing, what side of the street they're on, and so forth. You're reading all the codes. And as you read the codes based on your previous experience with other codes, other people walking down the street and people in general, you sort of at least imagine a feedback loop occurring, based on your previous experience. Some part of it is imaginative. You're filling in the gaps, but you say, oh, well, they're going to do this like this, and should they do this like that? Then you get some affirmation that you're reading the situation correctly. Of course, when I say imaginative, we fill things in often. There's gaps, there's things we can't see, and so we fill in to make sense of them. We do that in our interpersonal relationships in the world as we move through it, based on previous experiences with similar environments. So you read the codes, you look for the feedback loops. In order to do that, you move out of what I call your subjective territory. It's sort of your emotional, conceptual, physical scope through which you experience the world. It's shaped through our inculcation into ideology, how we're socialized. You develop a subjective territory. It's fluid, it's spatial temporal. I say maybe space first, temporal second, because if you ask yourself, how often do you forget what space you're in? You probably say never, yet you forget what time it is all the time, right? So space first, but they're together, space, time, all connected. So you look for, you're reading things, your environment as you move through it. I'll say that your becoming's your environment. Like say you're driving into an intersection, you start to become all the variables in the intersection. You become all the other drivers, the person on the bicycle, the lights, the concrete, the space through which you move is a way to kind of assess. In the first instance, is it a safe space through which to move? Then after that, how do you navigate it and how do you make the most of it? Maybe bottom line being, how can you most enjoy going through the intersection? So you have to anticipate all these different things happening. And you look for affirmation of your sort of, the as if and what if scenarios that you exercise. I'll call those your subjunctive movements. You move subjunctively, hypothetically. You imagine, is this person going to pull out? Is that bicycler going to go right through the intersection? Is that person seeing me or not? And what if they're not? You need sort of your plan B. How are you going to get out of the situation? You process all this really quickly, right? So you're getting a feedback loop, ideally, but if not, you have what I call a feed forward flow. Things start moving out in directions. Let's say they start to reel uncontrollably. Things kind of heighten when things aren't going the way you planned or imagined, when you can't filter out the noise in order to make sense of things. So we'll say that's becoming visceral, it's becoming intellectual and more electric. It's heightening in intensity. So this is how we experience our environments, this kind of heightened intensity. The direction I'm going is to talk about what artists try to create with their work. What happens is that we create something that's relatable, so there's some familiarity. So you can make the sort of unfamiliar and our familiar more familiar. Because it's important as an artist that our audience feels smart. If they don't get it at all, right? If they're really estranged by the work, if it's too strange, then they really can't make the unfamiliar familiar, then you don't get them, they're kind of left out. So you want to be kind of on the threshold of understanding, so that at least they can imagine they understand what they're experiencing, even if they really can't, but they can approximate it enough so they can feel good about themselves. And so there's a feedback loop occurring there. But at the same time, you want there to be enough surprise so it's exciting for them, right? Because surprise, we all know, releases dopamine. Learning requires surprise. You don't learn if you don't have a surprise, because or else you already knew it. So there needs to be some really enjoyable process where the feedback loops, the feed forward flows in a sense, fold into feedback loops as we start to make sense of the subject matter that we're experiencing. Okay, all that said, this is just a little bit of an introduction to some ideas. I wanted to show you a little sort of an excerpt from a show I did some years ago, where I tried to explore all these ideas through a performance work from 5 different directions, where I wanted to really understand what I'll call this post-phenomenological. So what happens when we have experiences that are unexperiencable, when they exceed our ability to understand what it is that we're looking at. And I picked this work to share with you, not only because it relates directly to the subject matter of our conversation, but also because Amma was a choreographer of it. So I thought it'd be fun to be talking about it together. And she was choreographing me, which is probably the worst dancer she's ever choreographed. But I did my best. So let me bring it up for you. Okay, share my screen here. Okay, you guys seeing my screen? Good. This is the moment where I look for that feedback loop. Somebody says, yes, we see it, and it's all good.
Yeah.
Yes. You see that?
Yes.
Hear it.
We are here.
We are here.
Is this a matter of temperature? Tickling causes heat. Repeat, 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 repeat. The anticipation of pain is like the anticipation of tickles. What is tickle? To be close but not too close. To move slow in anticipation of touch but not to touch. You make me hot. You're so hot. I want to eat you.
I want to eat you.
Nothing is identical. Nothing is identical. Not to itself.
Identical.
Nothing, 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 nothing.
Identical.
Nothing. Action! Four kinds of consciousness, right? Four kinds. Quotidian consciousness. Quotidian consciousness is the stance, awareness, and sentience common to second by second. You think about yourself, thinking about yourself, thinking about yourself, thinking, being in this theater, traction, exposure, titillation, reflexive consciousness.
Reflexive consciousness.
The LSD-like consciousness synesthetically harmonizes with everything through every sense, thinking, feeling. Its experience is unexperiencable.
Included spatially and cognitively by anticipation.
A blur, pause consciousness, a hyper-fast, affirm this in their own ways remarkably.
But it gets worse. If we follow Lacan, we would traumatize going's fractalactic, that is our most explosively pleasurable moments, into a perpetual shattering and splintering of the mirrors in which we fruitlessly seek totalized reflection. The subjectivity we hopelessly lack.
The masochist body, which usually suffers unforeseen side effects, but almost always requires the assistance of a sadist. Tell me, when someone asks for directions on the street when someone asks, is your inclination when someone asks to tell them the fastest way to get their desired destination? The fastest way. Yeah, it was the Before I get distracted.
Distracted.
Let's consider loss, but not just loss of control. When we become close to someone, we become vulnerable. We are invested in that person because they occupy some measure of our time and space, of our interiority and exteriority, of our fluids and flesh, of our consciousness. I miss you.
I miss you.
I miss you so much.
I miss you.
And they happily want more. Difference and repetition, creativity, momentous discovery, blah, 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 blah. Speed decreases predictability, given our abilities to process and comprehend the environment and our reactions to it. Would you like to smell my hat? The LSD, like consciousness, aesthetically harmonizes with everything, through everything. Thinking, feeling, tasting, seeing, touching, the snow, the rocks, the wind, the dirt, the rain.
Okay, so it's actually a pretty big show, 70 minutes long. And what it does is it tries to create in different ways an experiential situation where the feedback, oops, still have noise going on here. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Where the feedback loops break down, the feed-forward flows start to take over. So it becomes visceral, intellectual, electric. So then imagine that there's all these different codes coming at you. You're trying to read them. You know, intensity is heightened. Consciousness transitions from quotidian to reflexive to motored. You know, where you try to really hone in on things because you're just basically trying to hold on. So that what we try to do is create in the audience the experience of really trying to hold on because things are coming at them so quickly, so that they're becoming what I call fractalactic. They're breaking apart, they're fractalizing, and they're becoming galactic. They're coming together. And if the experience is enjoyable, you know, it's euphoric, then it's fractalicious, which is the title of the show. Right? So the idea is to create this fractalicity. And we toured that show from all through the UC system to the Netherlands, to Romania, to Lebanon. All different places with different audiences, with different subtitles, whether it's Romanian, Hungarian, or Arabic, and with really different, you know, kind of impact. And it was really interesting to see how people registered it and how they read it differently in different cultures, all the different coding that we tried to engage and present. So I guess maybe I can stop there, and we can talk a little bit about, I guess when we get there, about really what creativity is and how it's different maybe from innovation or being practical, you know, and what we hope to accomplish. This show is really about the relationship between speed and intimacy. If we're becoming close, are we going faster or slower? So let's just consider that for a moment. Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much, Brian, for the fantastic presentation and the show. And let's move now to Amma. Are you here, Amma? Yes.
Yes, yes.
You can share your screen.
Great.
But you may want to change the background.
Sure. So before we get going, I do have a few comments. Well, this is getting going. In fact, part of that getting going is dropping down into our bodies. And we've had a lot of information so far, and we've probably come to this gathering after a day of lots of information. So I'm just going to offer us a moment to drop our consciousness of what was happening before this moment to connect. I've called this talk today, following Brian's, interestingly, Creativity, Fractal, Corporeal Utterances. So I am of the body, as we all are, but it is my lingua franca. And within us all, there is a connecting instrument, which is our breath. So let's just take a moment to soften the gaze, lose the focus of the external impressions just to listen in. And in listening in, I'd like you to pay attention to the places where your body finds contact with another surface. Could be your hands on your lap. It could be your feet on the ground, your hips on the chair. Bring your attention to your breath, low down in your abdomen area, allowing the breath to be full and potentially even slow down. The space within us is that which gives rise to our creativity. And I say our, going to the mundane. And now allow yourself to place the palms of your hands together. And I'd just like you to imagine you have a small marble in between the palms of your hands, and you're just rolling that marble. So skin to skin connecting. Slow that experience down to feel. And breathe. And now turning that marble into a slightly more expanded version of what you were doing. So whatever it is that you are doing, you don't need to see me. You know what you feel. Amplify that feeling. Your palms may be pressed more deeply against one another. You may be making a greater surface area connection between one hand and the other. And it might even have morphed slightly. Yes. And allow that to unveil itself. What does it want to be? Maybe your marble is no longer there. Now notice your forearms and your shoulders. And your breath is still connecting at an even pace. Now I'd like you to press your palms together and now release your hands and relax your hands and just let the energy suspend between your palms. And now look beyond your hands into your space. Feel the back side of your body. Feel the front side of your chest expanding. Feel your spine elongated. Feel your connection to the ground. Your presence is appreciated. So we've just been on a journey of your imagination, which turned into a very clear, I hope, motor conception, and then expanded into feeling more of your body and the space around you, and that connection of our breath to each other. Who out of us has not felt creative at some point in their lives? Is there someone that said, I am just not creative? I just don't know about that creativity thing. I don't see any hands. So it's agreed. We are all creative. End of symposium, Michael. We know what it is. We are it. Life itself is an act of creation. But of course, I know we're talking about something a little different to that. We're maybe thinking about the hierarchy of the genius, the persons that get exalted. But I want to affirm that it comes from this place that we all access just now. But we get to practice it just in the same way that someone gets to practice polishing any other craft and slowing that journey down. Creativity, as was inferred in Brian's talk, there's a piece of it which is about slowing down and how we conceive our sensory organs. I'm drawing from a space, a cultural space, a landscape that's not Kant. It's not a European conceptualization. It's deeper, longer, felt understanding of practices that stem from a conceptual framework called Seselelama, which is Anlo Ewe, a cultural community in West Africa, parts of Ghana, parts of Nigeria, and Togo. They speak Ewe. This term Seselelama is in some ways very related to embodied cognition and the idea that reason is embodied. For example, there are over 80 ways that they describe the way a person walks. Their ontology is a constellation of intersensory as well as synesthetic concepts that are culturally shared. Sound is considered a leading sense. And there is also the recognition of kinesthesia and intuition. So the internal landscape and the externally felt touch, sound, seeing, impressions of the world are connected with an interior. Gesture and language are very deeply connected with sound. We all know how to talk, and I think we all know how to write. So we all want to know how to be more creative. So what we're going to do right now, I'm going to play some music. I'm going to take off my background, my screen, so you can see my motion. And we're going to do a small exercise together, which involves writing. But you're not going to write with paper. You're going to write in the air. Okay, so just going to change my virtual background. And I'm going to share my sound. And then we are going to play, or maybe we're going to investigate. Etutu, Yoruba, means play. It also means investigate. So we are going to share sound. Okay, so if I were to do this gesture, is that something you can all see? Okay, I'd like you to do this gesture with me. And I'd like you to keep breathing. And now I want you to slow it down. Yes, keep that pulse going. Trying to find my music. It's going to play in a moment because you're going to be in the right pocket of the time. Are you still going?
Yes.
Yes. Now, if I were to take this slower and longer, breathe. Now, what does this mean? Oh, we take the gesture again, the same gesture. Now, writing your name with your other hand and backwards from the last letter. Notice what you notice. Beyond the finger, notice what you notice. What do you notice in your space as you are making that possible? Now, I want you to write your name with your nose. Go.
Not backwards though, right?
Exaggerated, 7 times as big as you think it should be. Breathe. Now backwards with your ear. Write your name backwards with your ear. Breathe. Now, last time, with your eyes. Write your name with your eyes. And keep the pulse of the music in your toes at the same time. Now choose any of those gestures, any of those, and I'm going to explore them as I see them on screen.
I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
Are we supposed to be hearing your music at the same time?
Yes.
Oh, we are not. I think you have to share the
Oh.
screen to do it. We've been imagining the music all along. I
So
wasn't sure if that was part of it.
it was.
Okay.
Unfortunately, we'll have to get to that later in the questions. Maybe we'll bring it back. Okay, thank you, Mike. We'll bring it to a close there.
Thank you very much, Emma. Thank you. That was wonderful.
You are exquisite.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, our speakers. That was really fantastic. I mean, all the presentations and the shows and all this. Okay, so now we will move to the second part of our event, and we'll start the questions. So I would start where we finished. Emma, so the question for you now, I mean, we just like enjoyed all this, like just like all these creative moves. That's like, well, I never thought like about like writing my names in my eyes or my ears. But okay, so the questions, are there really, I mean, for you, are there stages of creativity? I mean, okay, so you reach this level. So I don't imagine I will be one day in your stage, but what are the stages of creativity? I mean, are there like preparation or incubation? When do you know that the eureka moment will happen? And how old were you when you knew that, okay, so I'll be there, I'm going to be there? Did your parents know or predict?
I don't think you ever think that as a child, although there was love, there was a passion. And therefore, there was a drive towards a magnetism towards that thing that I loved. And so I would not think about the number of hours that I spent practicing and playing in that space. But I also remember a very distinct point when I was actually learning to dance at home socially with my mother. And that was a point at which I already had a sense of developing my own way in terms of mirroring and the idea of fractal connection, and then that expansion. I already had that sense of, and I think as children, we have that sense of play, which we lose as we are socialized in other domains of education and societal norms. We lose spaces of play. We were just all together in this with a sense of play. I'm sorry you didn't have the music that I had in my ears, but I sensed that you were inside of it. You were connected, and I think that incubation is what happens with anyone who's pursuing anything that requires rigor and intensity. There's that passion and that repetition, and from there, the possibilities open up.
Thank you very much, Emma. So from here, I want to move to Brian. So Emma emphasized that the cultural impacts. So can you elaborate more on how much really cultures or even educational systems, organizations, institutionalized, education affect creativity? And are there cultures that suppress creativity versus cultures that nurture creativity?
I'd just like to piggyback on then to answer your question, Amal, and what Amma was saying about play, is that, I mean, we're born into a world of constraints, and those constraints are imposed on us early on, often through guilt and shame and anxiety. You know, the means by which, you know, educational institutions, everything from family to school, for some people, for church or whatever, try to impose different rules and regulations on them to get them to be good citizens, to abide by the societal standards in the measure of normalcy and so forth. I think that something that you know, that we learn early on, and some of us learn differently or embrace sort of this power differently, which I would call transversal power. It's the ability to kind of to play, to see the indeterminacy in meaning, and that all sort of structures are negotiable, and that meaning is really arbitrary, and so is power. And then I think that when kids sort of learn that they can, you know, better negotiate and therefore navigate the spaces through which they move through creating fictions, through creativity, then that's where they find their empowerment. Well, I think for others, the kind of oppressive forces of guilt and shame and anxiety are so strong, they're unable to sort of find the means by which to sort of negotiate and really capitalize on the inherent play to all meaning in all things. So I feel like those that really find ways to work within sort of established parameters in order to get outside of them tend to be in some ways more creative, we could say, or more, you know, delightfully creative, while others are they might be operating under stricter conditions, I want to say as well. So it isn't necessarily just on the individual. It could also be the environment in which we live. I mean, some have more privileges and more opportunity, while others have less. So there's definitely a disparity in subject position from which we all begin. and what constraints we're working under. But I think sort of play and creativity are, paramount to being able to negotiate the world and individuate and find your own your own individuality or subjectivity, which for me is something that operates transversely to the subject. I think of the subject is representative of how we've been subjectified by the society in which we live, but subjectivity is something that crystallizes in response. It's like how we move away and find ourselves, and it's processual and happens at different moments in different places and at greater and lesser degrees. But really, we're most present where we're most sort of individuated. And so there, long answer to your question, but.
Well, thank you very much. No, that's really very useful. Linda, so you spoke about two regions in the brain, the hippocampus and amygdala, and that's very interesting indeed for me. This is the first time I learned about like the role of amygdala in the aha moment, because like we always know amygdala is fear, the fear center.
Yeah.
So, and then you spoke about like, so it's the internal signal. So there is something in like novelty seeking, risk taking, maybe in the personalities of creative people.
Mm-hmm.
Do you attribute the role of amygdala in this, just like having this, the risk taking personality, and that might also involve the amygdala? And on the other hand, Brian also mentioned about like how this experience is rewarding the anticipation, and we know about like the role of dopamine even in risk taking. And so, is there any connection? I mean, your studies, they show any connection between amygdala and dopamine system in the context of the aha moment?
So yeah, that's actually a really good question. Let me come back. Let me talk about the amygdala and fear. So that circuit of amygdala and fear is the central nucleus of amygdala. So it's a neighboring circuit. It has actually different neurotransmitter systems. But that was one of the reasons we were interested in amygdala, is because we know that this is a signal that's capable of reaching consciousness. Fear is an emotion that we feel, right? And it helps to guide behavior. And I want to say that this idea that the basolateral amygdala is involved in the aha moment, that's an hypothesis. I haven't proven that. I would be really delighted if it turns out to be true. But I think it has to be in the brain somewhere, because I think that this idea that we have this pleasure in discovery, this pleasure in play, I think we really need to account for that. And it was kind of interesting because science has been really happy to like investigate pain and fear somehow way more than it investigates joy and pleasure. Well, there is a lot of work on reward circuitries, but those are external rewards, and what I'm looking for is an internal reward. And then some people ask, well, like, do you really think a rat has that? And I think even a rat, has to navigate the world. It has to figure out what's out there. It has to find regularities in the environment and encode those in order to guide its behavior. Now, in a human brain, we have this extremely elaborated associational areas in cortex. And so I think it gets way elaborate, way like, there's way more sort of possibilities of what we can do. And we, of course, have cultures and communications and languages. One of the things that really struck me watching both of these presentations was how much my thinking about aesthetic experience is related to, is visual. Right. And I was like, wait, I don't do a lot of thinking about aesthetic experience as embodied, as in dance. And I think that has to do with, because your question about like risk taking and dopamine and personalities, I think this really has to do with some combination of opportunity and encouragement. So coming the idea that everyone is creative when they're little, and then what happens, like some people seem to get kind of more rigid as they get older. And I think that has to do with what permission and encouragement they get from their wider culture and their immediate family and their social circle. And also what opportunities the social system gives them to engage in play and creativity. Like you said, there's a lot of privilege involved in having the space to be creative. Did I address your question?
Yeah. But I want also to ask another question about, so it's like, is there a difference between the being creative in science versus being creative in arts? So is the aha moment center same for both? And so I would like to extend this to another question. So we know that the greatest discoveries, for example, in math and physics, are really done during the 20th of, I mean, in young ages.
Oh, I see.
So while, for example, the best arts, the best music are done by those who did those in their 40s, 50s, 60s. So that's why that brings me, is there a difference really in the brain, how it functions in science creativity or art creativity?
I'm going to just jump in there because I haven't thought about this. A few years ago, I did a class in which I was teaching the art of creativity in this class, which was interdisciplinary. And I had some students who were from the sciences, PhD students in social sciences and in chemistry. And the chemistry PhD student, she later told me, and we were working with a constellation of concepts. So some of which were embodied, some of which were musically driven, some of which were scientific, thinking about teaching methodology. So we were looking at creativity very broadly, spontaneous creativity, so improvisation, if you will. And she later told me that the class, we intentionally disrupted the kinds of patterning that we all do daily. So the exercise I just did with you was part of that, like giving you a window into experiencing your body in a different way than you generally set it up to do. So I think there's something that happens when we disrupt patterns. We create openings, we create other kinds of connections. And this particular student, she said one day after about 7 weeks into the course, she went back to her lab and she did something very radical. I cannot explain what it was. She said, I flipped the whatever indicator. And she said it was very unconventional what she did, but then that set her research on a new trajectory, which was then when she had her aha moment. But we had these series of disruptions and we also collaborated. So I think there, in the sense of the space of the class, we think often about creativity as being a solo pursuit, which is why I called my presentation Fractals of Creativity. We're building on other people's innovations and creative ways of being. And then we tend to then think, well, that's how to do it. But we actually have to make a shift to be able to see something in a new way in order to then be able to offer the world or the game a new iteration. So I think there is that sense of disruption, happy disruptions, which allow us to enter the world with different layers of awareness awoken, which were normally dulled. Now, I'll just explain another thing that we did in that process. Like the Anlo Airways, they very much work with their aural, with hearing. Hearing is a lead sense, and they operate tonally in their language. So the same word said with a different accent or intonation can mean something completely different. The same word can mean pineapple on one level, it can mean chair said slightly differently. That's, and there are multiple ways in which this tonality works. So within the Anlo Airway, people, their sense of listening, their acuity is higher. So when I was in that space learning airway dances and music, I was listening with an anglophone ear. So it was very hard for me to understand the changes in the tone of the drum, which was to then intimate what the step was that I should perform. And if I didn't hear that nuance, even though I might know the pattern, like the regularity of the beats, but I couldn't hear the tonal shift, that bend, I was not set up to be able to deduce that, right? So there are these really nuanced ways in which creativity dwells. And when we're disrupted, right, as I was, and then settle and allow that ways of being that are not habitual to have a place, then new possibilities may open their way.
You mind if I say something? Just following Amma. I thought that what you did, the exercise was very effective. And I thought that it was even more effective fortuitously that we couldn't hear your music, because that left us to imagine the music.
Yes.
And just to say a couple of things, just also going back to what Linda was saying, is that let's say we're going to see a comedy, right? We're expecting it to be funny. So the genre gives us an expectation. There's already a frame, a familiar frame that we're expecting to be met in some way. And should that not happen, and should it move outside and we get something unexpected, really kind of, that can either be even better, it's more joyful because it moved out of an established parameter, or at the same time, it can be really threatening and disruptive. So I like to think about us having not just like an aha, but we have a duh-hey moment, right? Like duh. Linda, I've written about this quite a bit. I'll send you something. We have the duh moment. We have the aha moment, which we get a kind of recognition, something resonates. It's true. The feedback loop comes back. We see how smart we are and so forth. Then we also have the holy shit moment, where it's not processual, right? In a way that things kind of they exceed our ability to comprehend, right? And so I think those moments are the most exhilarating ones, potentially the most terrifying, but also the most fun and euphoric and exciting. So I think that in a way, like as artists, we look to create the moments that exceed. We don't want the duh moment. No way, the duh-hey moment, right? The aha moment's a good one, but if we can move into like the holy shit, then I think that's even going bigger.
Yes, the transcendent moment.
It's transcendent. That's right. It's the fractalicious.
I mean, the holy shit moment is what Kant calls the sublime. It's a whole nother.
I think so. I think it is. It potentially could be the sublime. Right?
But I mean, yeah, that's his terminology for it. We can call it what we want, right? We're talking about the experience.
Mm-hmm. I mean, if you look differently, let's say you want to get big muscles. So you go to the gym, you start working out because you want to get really buff. Right. So you start working out, and within the first few weeks, you show a lot of gains. Like things are great. You're getting really big, and you're looking in the mirror and things are like changing. But then after a while, what do you have? You have diminishing returns, right? Because the muscles are kind of compensation for what your brain can't do. Your brain finds the easiest way to do the given exercises. So what it does, it creates a neuronal, mapping that makes it most efficient. So we need to keep mixing it up. And if we want to keep getting to grow muscles, we got to keep mixing up the exercises.
I see.
That same goes for our brains in every way, right? So in terms of we want to see new and exciting art because that's going to mess with our brains in new and exciting ways.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you want to challenge yourself. And that's how you grow.
Linda, do you want to add something about the creative brain in science, creative brain in art?
I mean, I think I've said what I want to say. I think they're deeply related. That in science, the goal is to come up with something cognizable that we can then, that's determinate, that we can teach, that it's a new way of understanding the world. Whereas in aesthetics, in aesthetic judgment, it stays in play. That's the way I understand it. And you can come back to a beautiful object in the future. There's always something more to be found there. And I don't know if this addresses your question about age. I haven't thought about that before.
How does age affect creativity in art or science?
That is
I've got a
something I
lot to
haven't
say
thought
on that
about.
subject.
Maybe
I-
because the kind of materials you gain with experience are different than the kinds of skills and abilities that are needed to manipulate the materials to make a discovery in mathematics, say. But that is, I'm speculating at that point. I don't have an answer to that, and I don't know if that is that a biological reality or is that a cultural reality? Is that just something we expect? I don't know. I really don't know. I have to say that, yeah, with age, I definitely, I can tell my memory is not what it used to be, right? So I make different kinds of art, but maybe you need a really flexible, I don't know, capacious memory to do some of these things in physics and math, possibly, or actually, yeah. I can start talking about the mathematician Erdos. He was pretty productive until late in life, but yeah. So I don't know is the answer.
So I think that it depends on what art form that you're talking about. And, if you're talking about virtuosic, there's obviously going to be, a particular threshold. And if it's about something that has to do with, I don't know, being an architect, maybe that comes after you've designed your 20-second building, or maybe it comes early on and everything's then an iteration of that. But I think that to be inside of art is to also regress, right? Not everything is about it being this final wonderful work of art, but it's about process. And it is also about community. And that's what I would say in terms of many of the art forms that I work with. It's collaborative. And so my creativity is enhanced. It is propelled by the artistry and the creativity of other persons. So the sort of single auteur model is again very Western, and actually creativity is actually bolted on and threaded through, and it's collaborative. When we think about the concepts that are within many African diasporic forms of dance, for example, the concept within embodiology called collaborative competition, and you find that also within science. We wouldn't have had the COVID-19 vaccine if we didn't have collaborative competition, right? It's not the competition of I win, you lose, but this is what I got, what you got. Okay, we are building, and the energetically sharing and being dynamic in terms of how you work together and trying novel things and being inspired and seeing something that someone else is doing and then iterating that. And that novel moment happens fortuitously, by accident, happenstance, because there's a new young member in the team that says, what's that, right? It's not about the single. And I think for me, thinking about creativity and the future, the kinds of creativity that we need in the future is an ethically framed creativity, because we have things to repair in terms of human terms, in terms of the earth, in terms of sentient life and mineral life. We have so much creativity that's happened in human history. Now creativity, what should it be bringing forth? Not just more creativity, but what does that collective mind need to be, so that we're bringing those that have the least opportunity to the space where they too can practice their creativity, and that it isn't this prime thing that's only those that have funds and support and sponsorship that can then have that auteur experience. But we all have it. We all are creative by dint of our breath. We are creative, and we can learn to be more creative. We can relearn how to play. I am not speaking from my own experience. I'm speaking in terms of what I've seen in my work through other people. So I think now it may be interesting to look at brain science collectively. What makes for the collective brain to make the kinds of creative shunts of human possibility move to the next level? That's what I'd like to see.
Wonderful, Emma. I think we have only 11 minutes. So, Mike, would you like to lead
Sure.
discussion now and questions
Yeah,
from audience?
I'm happy to. And there's a number of questions actually by the audience that have been addressed in some ways. I think that focus on age and what happens as we get older with creativity. That was one that was addressed to an extent. I'm going to try to open it up a little bit with just thinking about something that comes to mind immediately when I think about creativity, and it comes from Sir Ken Robinson, the late Sir Ken Robinson. I'm not sure if you know who he is, but he has this incredible TED Talk. I think it's one of the most frequently watched TED Talks ever on how schools kill creativity. He makes the case that, as was mentioned earlier by the panelists, several of you said, children at a very early stage, very, very creative, but as structure kind of constrains that creativity as they get older, that might actually have a negative impact on their creativity. And the question is, do we really believe that that's what's going on, or is it that at an early stage there is so much that is unknown, and children are constantly simulating their environment and testing hypotheses and having to be creative just so that they can learn around their surroundings, so that the domain of the knowable but still unknown is quite vast. And as we get older, there's just so much more that we already know. So in fact, the chance to be creative kind of diminishes as we get older. Is that a suspicion that we have that might result in diminished creativity as we get older? And it's possible that those who stay creative are the ones who have created new domains where they can continue to explore? Linda, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So the domain of the unknown, that remains as large as you want to have it, right? We do, the child has a lot to learn in order to be able to function in society, right? But if we can make the space for them to continue to express their creativity, I think it's as much room for it as we can leave, we can have. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I think it is something that is that as you grow, right? You have to fix some concepts. If we want to talk about cats and dogs, right? We have to be able. I need to expect that you know what I'm talking about. But we also, I think we're better off when we have the space to do the play, to do the creativity. And I think it's true that our educational system may be kind of suppressing that and could be doing better.
So you're suggesting that it's really kind of the environmental impact, and one could work to create more of those frameworks that will facilitate creativity into older age and beyond.
I think to make space for it. Yeah. I mean, people who are still making space for music in their lives. And of course, some of us here professionally are engaged in creative endeavors. That's how we make a living, right? The guy who runs the train, maybe we don't want him to be too creative while he's steering. But what do we do about that as a society, right? And actually, a lot of my work is not that creative. I have to go and clean up after the rats, but that has to be done in a certain way, otherwise things fall apart. And that is a balance in life. But I don't want to go too far. I want to say that we want to make more space for people to engage in the creative side, because it's part of who we are as human beings. And we don't have to grow up and become rigid.
Comment on this for a moment?
Please.
So when my kids were little, I would take them all around the world and expose them to all kinds of different cultures and things. And people would say to me, well, they're not going to remember the experience, so why are you doing it? And I'd say, well, it doesn't really matter so much that they remember the experience, because we learn whether we remember the details or not. Like my kids have been skiing since they were really little, and they don't lose the ability to ski as they get older. In fact, they just get better. So in fact, having been exposed to different cultures around the world when they're little just makes them more sociable and more relatable and more adaptive as they get older. And so they don't need to remember the specifics. And I think that to the extent that people stop exploring or stop being adventurous or stop reparameterizing, then they can become more stagnant and more set, or maybe the neuronal pathways they've established become kind of routed and routinized, and they can't break out of them. I really don't subscribe to the idea that age, that our ability to be creative diminishes in any way whatsoever with age. I think they're just impositions that come on us as we get older, greater responsibilities. We have to provide in different ways for different people and so forth. I would suggest if you're feeling a little bit, like a bit in a rut, then just try to do something more radical, take LSD, do something, go on some adventure, like go big mountain skiing, which I like to do, do something to just radically reparameterize your existence and see how you come out on the other end. This is probably why like ayahuasca ceremonies have become popular in the last 10 years. People are looking for ways in order to sort of get outside of their routines. So just do it.
I just want to clarify that Reynolds' advice does not represent the views of the UCI Brain Initiative. But no, point well taken, of course.
So I'm just gonna say that we put the artist on the pedestal as this unattainable, zenith, and therefore I cannot reach to that great height. Therefore, I can't pick up my cello. I can't pick up my whatever it is that I used to play. There's no space in my life because I'm not going to become a recording artist. And I think we don't have spaces for adults in large numbers to be able to actually participate in, oh, okay, I'd like to explore drawing again, or I'd like to try, without this notion of judgment, as opposed to the experience, aesthesis, as opposed to aesthetic, right? The process, the re-engagement, the re-engineering of the recalibration of our bodies, our minds, our spirits towards an opening, not with the notion that it's going to become the way I'm going to, earn my living. And the other thing is that I think we don't necessarily, as a society, respect children's play. We think that that's a thing that children do. But if you actually watch them with a sense of the wonder and the level of imagination and play and creativity and innovation and invention, they are a marvel. And the fact is that we lose the possibility of doing that because we've decided that that is child's play. And that's on the way to being what? Taking antidepressants because you don't have anything that gives you joy. And I'm going to invite everyone here to my class, Joy in Motion, where we do find ways to recalibrate our senses and connect with our space in ways that do enable you to open the door to your thinking. Recently, I've had a data scientist sort of join the community, and every week she talks about the experience, the ways in which the work is really opening up her way of thinking about solving problems. So the body and this separation between, mind and body, like the brain, the mind is mapped over this entire instrument. It doesn't exist in isolation. It's right. All of our bodily processes, all of that intelligence is connected. And hopefully in time, we'll be able to engineer ways of understanding that. It's very difficult, I understand, with current technologies because it's been created. Somebody's imagination decided that brain imaging was done without motion. Well, that's what we've got until we get to the next threshold where we can get that quality of imaging whilst we're in motion. We won't necessarily understand the intelligences that are in the body. We're just assuming all of the time with a set of codes that have been affirmed through research that that's the way. It's a way. It might not be the way to get to the fullest understanding of what creativity is, because it isn't isolated. It is all embodied.
So the MRI helmet is coming soon, and that will allow us to do all the brain imaging during the movement that we'll want to do. So thank you for saying that, and I love what you said about children playing and having that be a completely normal thing. And then, of course, as we get older, we label it as child's play. We can't really engage in it to the same extent. And I think that there are societal norms, obviously, that we have to worry about. And as adults, we restrict ourselves or put those boundaries on ourselves to prevent us from engaging in that play. For a child to have, an imaginary friend that they're talking to, if I'm an adult doing that, I'm immediately labeled as someone with schizophrenia. So it's a very different world, I think, in terms of creativity for children and for adults. There's one question in the chat. I know we're running out of time, but there's so many great questions. There's one question in the chat that I think is really relevant, and I'd love for this group to provide some insight. And it has to do with the type of creativity that we tend to emphasize, and going beyond creativity in the form of artistic expression to creativity in everyday sorts of problem solving around family or friends or situations. Do we think of that creativity in the same way that we think of it for artistic expression?
I'm going to lean into that.
Sure.
Just because within the framework of embodiology, there's a space that we call audience proxemics. So that's the relationship between you, the creator, the one that's generating, and those that are in your midst. And what that practice is about is deep listening. And listening with, again, your whole body. We have a concept called kinesthetic mapping. You have devised this concept in cognitive science of kinesthetic empathy. Well, I take the idea of kinesthetic mapping as a way of seeing and physical listening. So I think in terms of problem solving and being creative, learning how to listen is an art. And I struggle with it still, but it's something I think is so important across all domains of life.
I mean, so art is about community, right? If you make a work of art, you're hoping to share it with someone else, whether it's a work of literature or music or painting or dance. And when you talk about creative problem solving, I think that's creative in this sense of finding a new solution to a problem that you didn't have already. You don't have, you have this set of boxes, tools, and you're like, none of this is working. I need to find something else. And so you creatively come up with a different way of dealing with the given. But the way you posed the question was that there's a goal, there's a problem, there's a goal that you have that you're trying to solve. And so that to me takes it out of this purely aesthetic and into the domain of problem solving. So it's more like science, but this is a continuum, right? Because when is community about a problem, and when is it about just the experience of being together? And then I think the boundaries start to blur a little bit.
I think that just following what you said, Linda, I think that art it's always already collaborative. I mean, I don't think there's anything that comes from nothing. But just a comment on the idea of there being a purpose. I think people sometimes think of desire as being predicated on lack, that we have to desire an object, which is why we have desire, as opposed to thinking of desire as really being the subject and object of desire. We thrive on desire and having desire. The desire is process. The desire that produces more desire. I think if we think along those lines, then we can really sort of celebrate in kind of the exuberance of desire, and not in the thing we create, but in the process of creating.
Thank you, Brian. And maybe just to wrap up here, I know we're out of time. There's one comment and question in the chat that I just want to end on from Helen Harris. Nearing 80 years old, taking 6 art classes, I find creativity as a way to express and interpret what I need to say in another way. I wonder how we will use creativity to solve climate change and all those changes that will come with that for the many populations. And I just could not resonate with that more. I think we're talking about creativity for the purpose of problem solving. What bigger problem than something like climate change that could use everyone's creativity to be able to get a handle on it. And keep up the good work, Helen. I think 6 art, probably not enough 6 art classes. That's, I think, you need a few more, but thank you for being an inspiration. Amal, do we have anything else you want to wrap up with?
Well, I only want to thank the panelists very much for this fantastic, really panel. I mean, this is one of the best. Well, they all are very good. But I mean, we end with really, I mean, fantastic panel. Thank you very much for being with us, and thank you for our audience to stay with us. Now it's like 8:04. So Michael.
I have just one last thing that I want to say. Certainly, I want to thank the panelists one more time, and I do also want to thank our colleague Diana Laughlin, our Director of Operations for the initiative and for the center, who really makes all of these events work and handles all of the programming, makes it all look very easy. And then finally, since this is our last event, I'd like to just give a special shout out and thank you to my colleague, Dr. Amal Alashkar, for her efforts in conceiving of this series, hosting this series, spending so much time and putting in the effort and dedication to really ensure that it came out fantastic. And for that, we actually have something for her that I don't think you can see it here. I'm not sure. No, can't. Oh, there it is. Sort of. It's a plaque, and I'll tell you what it says on it because it's really hard to do with it's the 2020 Visionary Award in appreciation of your outstanding leadership and commitment to promoting interdisciplinary dialogue. So that will go to you, Professor, the next time that we see you. With that, just wanted to end on that thank you note. This has been an incredible series of events, and thank you for obviously your vision and putting it all together.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much.
Of course. All right, with that, I think we will adjourn. We will hopefully see you all, maybe some of you in person in the fall. And like I said, look out for the special announcements about the initiative in the fall. And enjoy your summer, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.